Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video you will learn what are source maps in JavaScript, why do we need them and how we can use them correctly. Also make sure that you watch this video until the end, because I will share my tip how you can use source maps in production and hide them so that people won't see your code. So let's jump right into it. The first question is, do we have a problem at all and what are we trying exactly to solve? For this we need to look on modern JavaScript application. Actually, as you can see, we have a lot of new features in JavaScript and they are coming really every day or every month. And these features are not directly available in all browsers. This is why we're using tools like, for example, Babel to transpile our JavaScript and new features in the old version of JavaScript. And then at some point we're getting rid of the old transpiled code automatically. For example, a lot of new features from ECMAScript 6, 7 or 8 are not supported everywhere. Let's say, for example, async await or spread. And this is how code is looking in my editor when I'm writing it, and this is how this code is looking when we transpiled it with Babel. As you can see, there are a lot of differences. And on the top of that, we're adding Webpack with some minification tools, and then our code will be completely unreadable. Which means we can't really debug this code in browser when we're using our JavaScript there. And this brings us to source maps. So actually what we want to do is debug our JavaScript in browser when we have some bugs, for example. But we can't really do this if in browser our code is looking completely different than in editor. And even better, when our code is minified, then we can't really read it in the browser. And source maps really solve exactly this problem. And they are working in all browsers, and normally you can generate these source maps through a lot of tools like, for example, Babel or Webpack. So what is exactly source map? This is an additional file in JSON format which has the file names, lines and mappings between the original file and the dist file which was generated. So let's check on the example. As you can see, here I have an empty index.html with just main.js script inside. Now let's open main.js, we don't have anything here. So let's write a function and use some new syntax here. For example, we can create here function add, and here we're getting an argument. So actually what we are doing here is called spread. And we want here to use it in order to get access to all arguments that we passed inside. And now we want just to add all these arguments together and get their sum. This is why here I can say args.reduce, because in this case args will be an array. And now we're calling reduce, and here we have our sum and element, and here is our function. And at the beginning we have 0. Now what we want to do, we want to return sum plus element. Which means this function add can work with any amount of argument and just returns the sum. So let's try it out. Here is console log add 1, 2, 3. So we are passing in arguments. We are using here a new feature from ECMAScript 6. Here is our spread, and let's look in browser. As you can see in console, we are getting here 6, which means everything is working correctly and this function is working. But actually we don't want to use it in browser like this, because we are not sure that this spread is supported everywhere. What we want to do is install Babel on our machine and transpile this file, so we are sure that this file will work in all browsers. And additionally, Babel can generate source maps for us. So let's do this now. First of all, I'm jumping in console and I'm installing here globally Babel CLI. So if you don't know what is this, Babel CLI is a command line tool which helps us to write Babel on our files that we want. So here Babel CLI is installed, and now I need to install a preset for Babel CLI. So here I'm saying npm install Babel minus preset, and here will be ES 2015. So we're installing preset for Babel because without it Babel can't work. And now what we need to do is just run it. So Babel, now the name of our file. As you can see here, the name of our file is main.js. This is why here we're writing main.js and here --out file. So this is where our file will be transpiled. And we can name it main.dis.js. And additionally, we can say --sourcemaps, and in this case, Babel will generate sourcemaps for us, and here we're setting preset, which we installed. Now we're just hitting enter, and as you can see, we don't get any output. This means that we don't have any errors, and as you can see here, we're getting in editor two new files, main.dis.js and main.dis.js map. Now let's compare our source file and our dist file. So here on the left I opened our source file and on the right our dist file. And as you can see, they are not really similar because this spread was really changed in for loop. And actually it is looking completely different. And yes, we can read this code at some point, but it is not the same like seeing the same code like you are seeing in the editor. And additionally, as you can see, Babel generated source maps for us. So this last line is our source maps. So here we can have relative path, absolute path, or whatever path we want, for example, even from another domain. So actually this last line is the most important for us, because all browsers will just parse our dist file .js and go to the last line and check if we have this source mapping URL or not. And then if we have it, they will try to load our source map from this location. Now let's check what we have inside Sourcemaps. So here is our file main.dist.js map, and .map, this is special extension for Sourcemaps. So as you can see here we have a JSON, and inside first of all the version of Sourcemaps, and then in sources what file we are working with, here are names and here is source content. So actually in this file you will have all mappings for all lines which are unclear and were transpiled. Now let's add our dist file to index.html and open it in browser. So here we need to jump inside index.html and use here main.dist.js. Now let's reload the page. As you can see, we have here still 6, but here we have main.js. And when I'm hitting here on the file, as you can see on the left, I can make it a little bit smaller so we can see it. So here on the left we have our folder, then index.html, and here we see two files. First of all, main.dist.js and main.js. And the most important is when here in the console I want to go to sources, so I'm clicking here on the right, I'm going directly in main.js. So normally it should jump inside dist.js, because here you can see in source we are using main.dist.js. But actually Chrome already saw here this line, source mapping URL, and loaded our source maps. This is why it jumps directly inside main.js, and here I can see the code in exactly the same way like it is inside editor. What is also awesome is that we can use debugger and breakpoints with source maps, which actually means here, for example, on line 2, I can put a breakpoint and reload the page. And as you can see, we first of all directly jump to breakpoint, and secondly, this spread args is showing for me correctly because this is the array. Because with these 3 dots, we're converting all arguments to the single array. And this is really nice because we don't see here outputted code in dist, but we see here really the source code that we wrote. So here is my bonus tip that I promised you regarding using source maps on production. So normally people are just using source maps locally because they don't know how to hide them on production, for example. I highly recommend you to use source maps everywhere, like locally, on stage and on production, because this is just easier to debug code when you are seeing source code. But now the question is how we can hide source maps on production. Locally and on stage it's not a problem, because normally only a team or a company have access to the stage or local environment. But on production everybody have access to the website, which actually means that we don't want to show source code for all people, which means we need to hide somehow source maps. So actually there are only 2 solutions for this problem, and the first solution is really bad and second is elegant. So normally people are using first solution. The point is that you can with Babel just generate 2 output files, one with sourcemaps and one without sourcemaps. And then you have some logic in your server where you are checking cookie or IP address or whatever to know that you need, for example, for developers, to load version with sourcemaps. And for the whole world, you are loading version without sourcemaps. And this is of course fine and it is working, but first of all, really generating production build takes a lot of time, because minification is not fast, which actually means you doubles generating of your output just to have source maps. Secondly, it takes space on your drive, and also you need to build some logic in your backend in order to manage these two versions. This is why the second variant is better. What is it about? You can just hide source maps or load them only when you have specific IP or when you have a specific cookie or just when you're working with VPN. So actually you can use other domain or IP address for your source maps. Then for the whole world, if they are not using that IP address, you will get sources without source maps because Chrome can't really read them. And for developers, you can just load the version with source map automatically because they are allowed to be loaded from VPN, from IP address, or from that specific domain. This is the easiest solution that I highly recommend you on production. So now you know what are source maps, why do you need to use them, and how they are generated. And actually, if you want to improve your programming skills, I have a lot of advanced courses regarding different web technologies, and I will link them down in the description box below, so don't forget to check them out. And if you like this video and you want more content like this, don't forget to put thumbs up to support me and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't like this video, consider watching it once again on increased speed, that might help. And I will see you in my next video.